Jumping into session 2, this week we're going to talk about gender roles and how gender and the family is interrelated. For session 2, you'll need to read my session email. Make sure you do the assigned reading before you complete the journal, and then make sure that you are watching the lecture videos and completing the notes together, as well as completing the writing activity. Just as a reminder, those lecture videos do not take the place of reading your textbook, so please make sure you don't skip over that important part. I'm going to take a few minutes and review the 3 theories of sociology, or the 3 main theoretical paradigms in sociology. And I hope by now you remember what those 3 are: structural functionalism, conflict theory, and symbolic interactionism. You'll see these 3 photos many times in an effort to help remember which one of these theories plays which role in our sociological views. We'll get started with structural functionalism. When we look at gender in regards to the theory of structural functionalism, we see that gender roles have certainly changed over time. So prior to the industrial era, we look at the old way of living when the men were doing the hunting, the killing, the building of the structures, and they were doing those things in an effort to provide for their families. The women played much more of a domestic role in their family units. So they tended the gardens, they did the home-based chores, and they cared for the children. Those roles of men and women there actually had a structural function within society, and that was survival. Now, those roles certainly went along with the biological makeup of the genders. We see the male strength used in the male roles because we know that bodies are created differently. A man's body and build is created for strength. And so the roles that the males played were because of their ability or their functions of their bodies. The female role obviously went along with offspring. So women were the ones that could bear children, and so that's where their roles stemmed from. They stayed in close proximity to the home place, doing those domestic chores and those duties that go along with pregnancy, nursing, and child rearing. Looking back at that time, some of this can certainly be argued as dysfunctional, can be viewed as negative or oppressive to one gender or the other. But those roles were very established and passed down from generation to generation. We'll also see that this particular structure and this function changed very rapidly when society advanced. And so we saw that in the World War II era, where so many men were off at war and the females had to step in and fulfill some of those roles that the men were previously fulfilling. So that was when we saw women enter the workforce and become those primary income earners for their families. Then we also saw when the men came back from war, we saw the really tough time of readjustment. The expectation of society was that things would return back to the way they were prior to the war. And so that leads us into conflict theory. If we look at conflict theory and how it relates to gender and gender roles, conflict theorists will say that men and women are in a constant struggle for power and resources. They'll also argue that the reason for the conflict is because men are historically the dominant ones in society, and that women are expected to be subordinate to them. These theorists will share that this creates exploitation, oppression, and inequality between the 2 genders. And as we know, whatever group has the power also has the most resources and is therefore able to create rules and laws within their society, which can further those negative consequences for the lesser group. However, we have seen some change in society due to the conflict that removes that dependency from one gender on the other. We've seen that marriage rate decline. We've seen the income level of women increase, and that has changed some of that traditional outlook of the struggle between men and women. Additional research is still being conducted on the effects of what we would say domestic burden, or that second shift, where some theorists argue that there is unequal distribution of the workload within the home, and that this is stemming from the traditional view of what a male role and what a female role looks like. And finally, when we look at gender roles and how they relate to symbolic interactionism, remember, this is interpreted based upon your experience. So this is a micro level analysis. So we will use symbolic interactionism when we look at symbols in our environment and how it makes us attach gender to those things. This theory argues that gender is socially constructed, such as how our members view jobs or the career fields they pursue. When you think about a teacher, a nurse, a plumber, a firefighter, which of those careers make you think of a female or a male? Another example would be activities that people do. So think about a gender when I say playing football or a dancing ballerina. Clothing is something else that is very easily attached to gender when we see a piece of clothing. Emotions is another. Think about your expectations of how an emotional response should come from a female versus a male. Do you expect a male and a female to act differently in certain emotionally charged environments? And so essentially, these theorists argue that we as a society have socially constructed these particular ideas in order to organize our society into genders.